You see, when we talk about avoidant individuals, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking they don't care. You might catch yourself saying, they don't love me like I love them. They don't notice me when I'm gone. And on the surface, that can feel painfully true. But here's the thing that most people miss. Avoidants aren't avoiding you. They're avoiding the vulnerability that closeness demands. It's not absence that scares them. It's intimacy. It's the raw, unfiltered human connection that most of us crave, but they perceive as a threat. Think about it this way. Closeness is like a mirror, and it doesn't just reflect the person standing in front of it. It reflects you. It reflects your needs, your desires, your fears, your imperfections. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, that mirror can feel overwhelming, almost like stepping into a room full of bright lights that you can't dim. So instead of leaning in, instead of allowing themselves to feel, they step back, they pull away, they retreat. And what they're really doing underneath all of that apparent detachment is self-preservation. Now, I want you to really hear this because it's a paradox that can be life-changing once you understand it. Avoidants fear closeness more than they fear loss. While most of us are conditioned to think absence should hurt them, the truth is, absence is tolerable, sometimes even preferable compared to the anxiety that intimacy brings. They'd rather risk losing someone than risk losing themselves in the intensity of emotional connection. And that's not because they're heartless, it's because vulnerability in their minds is dangerous. This doesn't make their behavior any less painful for you, of course. You might be wondering why your consistent care, your presence, your attention seems to go unnoticed, why your absence can feel invisible for weeks or even months. And that's the cruel genius of avoidant psychology. They often do not process absence in the way we expect. Their brain isn't wired to measure love in the presence or absence of others. It's wired to measure safety in terms of emotional exposure. So while you're thinking, if they cared, they'd feel this, what's really happening is that they're asking themselves, can I tolerate this closeness without losing myself? And here's the kicker. The more you understand this, the more you understand them, and the more power you reclaim in your own life. When you stop personalizing their distance as a reflection of your worth, you start to see the pattern clearly. You start to recognize the moments when your absence actually becomes a tool, not a punishment, not a test, but a mirror for them to confront their own fears. Your absence doesn't create the distance. They did, long before you even stepped back. What you do is simply illuminate it. So when you feel the sting of indifference, remember this. It's not a verdict on your value. It's a reflection of their internal struggle. A battle with vulnerability that predates you. And when you finally grasp this, you shift from being reactive, chasing, pleading, explaining yourself, to being strategic, centered, and undeniably whole in your own right. Let that sink in. Their avoidance isn't about losing you. It's about the unbearable closeness that forces them to confront the very parts of themselves they've been running from. And that, my friends, is the key to moving forward. Understanding that in every avoidant interaction, what you're really witnessing is fear in disguise, not a lack of love. Your clarity becomes your power, and your absence, far from being empty, becomes an act of profound insight. Because at the end of the day, the truth is simple but revolutionary. Avoidants don't fear losing you. They fear losing themselves. And when you understand that, you stop chasing shadows and start mastering presence in a way that no one can take from you. Now let's take the conversation a step deeper. You've come to understand that avoidants fear closeness more than loss. That's the foundation. But here's where the dynamics shift and where your power begins to emerge. Absence doesn't just matter, it reveals. It amplifies awareness in ways that constant presence never can. Think about it for a moment. When someone is always available, their mind becomes complacent. The brain doesn't have to stretch, it doesn't have to notice, and it certainly doesn't have to feel. Availability can dull attention, and for the avoidant, that's exactly what they need. A buffer from feeling. They're safe in the routine, in the predictability of your presence, even if they don't consciously recognize it. But as soon as you step back, physically, emotionally, or even energetically, a shift occurs, a gap forms, and in that gap, clarity starts to emerge. Your absence acts like a mirror, not in a confrontational sense, but in a reflective one. They see themselves in ways they couldn't when you were always right there. They notice the little things, the laughs they've missed, the conversations they've brushed aside, the warmth they've taken for granted. And this isn't about punishing them. It's about revealing the truth that their avoidance has hidden from them. Suddenly, what was background noise, the comfort of your constant presence, becomes a glaring absence, and that absence speaks volumes. It's important to understand why this works. Avoidants live in a paradoxical world of emotional push and pull. On one hand, they crave connection. They want love, intimacy, understanding. But on the other hand, closeness triggers fear, discomfort, and anxiety. When you're always there, the fear dominates. It's easier for them to ignore their desire, to rationalize it, to suppress it. But your absence interrupts the pattern. It creates a tension they can't intellectualize away. It forces them to feel the reality of the connection they've been sidestepping. And here's where most people make a mistake. They try to fill the absence with explanations, apologies, or pleading. But that's not the point. Your absence is not a punishment. It's a signal, a boundary, and a mirror all at once. It's a subtle yet profound way of saying, I am valuable, and my presence is not guaranteed. I will not diminish myself to make you comfortable. That, my friends, is a seismic shift in the psychological landscape of an avoidant. It's where awareness begins to spark, where recognition stirs, and where reflection replaces ignorance. Notice this carefully. The moment your absence triggers reflection is not always accompanied by immediate change. Avoidants can be slow to process, slow to respond, because their first impulse is often to retreat even further. But the seed has been planted, and seeds, though invisible at first, have the power to grow roots that eventually cannot be ignored. Your absence opens the doorway to that growth. It doesn't force the change, it invites it. And here's the beauty of this principle. It works both ways. Not only does absence reveal their awareness, it reveals yours. It teaches you patience, discernment, and the art of emotional economy. The ability to invest your energy only where it is reciprocated and respected. It trains you to observe without overreacting, to hold your ground without guilt, and to see the value of what you bring into a relationship, even if others have not yet recognized it. So the next time you feel tempted to chase, to explain, to justify, remember this. Absence is your silent amplifier. It is not empty. It is not void. It is active. It magnifies the truth that has been hiding beneath fear and avoidance. And in that amplification lies clarity, not only for them, but for you. It is the space in which the avoidant finally sees the connection they've been ignoring, and the space in which you finally see the patterns you've been enduring. Because here's the ultimate truth. Your absence is not a threat. It is a revelation. It forces reflection, it triggers recognition, and in its wake, it leaves both parties with one undeniable insight. Presence is powerful, absence is meaningful, and awareness, the deep, uncomfortable, transformative awareness, is where change begins. So, when you step back, step with intention. Step with self-respect. Step knowing that your absence is not a loss. It is the spark that illuminates what has been invisible. And remember this, what you choose to remove from the equation often teaches more than what you tirelessly provide. Now that we understand that avoidants fear closeness more than loss, and that your absence amplifies their awareness, let's take a closer look at what happens in the space between those two realities. What do avoidants do when they are confronted with intimacy, or when your absence forces them to notice what they've been ignoring? They test boundaries, and they do it in subtle, sometimes almost invisible ways. This is one of the most important dynamics to grasp if you want to truly understand avoidant psychology. Testing boundaries is not about manipulation in the traditional sense, although it can feel manipulative. It's about self-protection, about gauging how much emotional exposure they can tolerate without feeling overwhelmed or losing control. Avoidants are constantly negotiating a tightrope between connection and autonomy. And because they are acutely sensitive to the idea of being consumed by intimacy, they will create emotional distance to see how much they can get away with while still maintaining a sense of safety. Think about it like this. Imagine a tightrope walker suspended above a chasm. Every step forward is exhilarating but risky. Every hesitation, every pause is necessary for survival. That tightrope is the boundary between closeness and fear. Your presence, your attention, your love, they are the wind that challenges their balance. And your absence, it's the space below that forces them to consider what happens if they step too far or if they don't step at all. When they test boundaries, you might notice them withdrawing, becoming unusually quiet, or even creating minor conflicts where none seem necessary. You might feel like you're being pushed away without explanation, or that your efforts to connect are being met with resistance. That's exactly the point. They're observing, measuring, and calibrating, not consciously plotting against you, but instinctively protecting themselves from the intensity of feeling. Here's where most people make the mistake. They take the withdrawal personally. They think, If they really cared, they wouldn't do this. If they loved me, they wouldn't create distance. And it's understandable. On the surface, it feels personal. But in reality, their testing is a reflection of their internal struggle, not a judgment of your value. The tighter the boundary they create, the more anxious they are about closeness. The more they resist, the more they are wrestling with their own fear of being overwhelmed by connection. Now, this doesn't mean you should accept unhealthy behavior. Testing boundaries can feel painful, frustrating, and destabilizing, but it does mean you need to respond with awareness rather than reaction. When you recognize that their distance is a signal rather than a verdict, you regain control over your energy and your choices. You stop chasing, pleading, or trying to force them into comfort. Instead, you observe. You allow them to test. You maintain your own boundaries and integrity. And in doing so, you create a framework in which they can safely confront the tension between fear and desire. One of the most powerful lessons here is that their testing often contains a hidden message. A cry for understanding, a need for patience, or even a subconscious acknowledgement of your importance. They may not articulate it, and they may never say it outright, but every withdrawal, every hesitation, every boundary they test is tied to a deeper awareness of the connection that matters. Your challenge is to perceive that message without losing yourself in the drama of their emotional distancing. The key is to remember that avoidance is never absolute. It is fluid, it is dynamic, and it is intensely self-regulating. When an avoidant steps back, they are not rejecting you. They are negotiating with their own fear. When they test your boundaries, they are trying to understand how much closeness they can tolerate without losing themselves. And when you respond with clarity, presence, and calm, you provide a mirror that allows them to see not just what they fear, but what they value. So here's the takeaway. Avoidance will test boundaries because intimacy is threatening and distance is safer. But your response, the way you hold your ground, the way you maintain your own integrity, the way you resist reacting out of fear or frustration, determines the trajectory of the connection. You cannot control their fear, but you can control your presence, your energy, and your choice to refuse manipulation while still holding space for their growth. In the end, testing boundaries is less about you and more about their inner negotiation with vulnerability. And when you understand that, you stop being pulled into the chaos of their avoidance and instead step into the clarity of your own power. You realize that their tests are not obstacles. They are opportunities to observe, to learn, and to rise above patterns that do not serve either of you. Because here's the truth that changes everything. When an avoidant tests your boundaries, they are asking, without words, whether you can remain steady, centered, and whole in the face of fear. And the way you answer that question defines the strength of the connection for both of you. Now, let's explore a phenomenon that surprises so many people, and yet it's one of the most powerful levers in understanding avoidant psychology. Your absence can trigger unexpected action. And I want you to sit with that statement, because it flips a lot of conventional wisdom on its head. Most of us have been conditioned to think that availability is the path to connection, that showing up consistently, explaining ourselves, doing more, giving more, that is how we are seen, valued, and loved. But in the world of the avoidant, that constant presence often keeps them asleep to the reality of the relationship. Think about it for a moment. When someone is always there, it's easy for them to take it for granted. Their attention doesn't need to stretch, their feelings don't need to wake up, and the mirror of your value doesn't demand acknowledgement. Availability can create invisibility. And here's the truth. Avoidants are incredibly sensitive to scarcity, not in a material sense, but in an emotional sense. When they perceive that something might no longer be available, something shifts inside them. The mind can no longer rationalize, the heart can no longer avoid, and suddenly attention, desire, and action stir in ways that were dormant when you were constantly present. Your absence is like a spark in a dry forest. It doesn't force a fire, but it creates the conditions for one. And make no mistake, this fire is often unexpected. It might show up as a text, a call, a sudden invitation, or even a vulnerability you've never seen before. It might feel like a jolt, a shock to your system, but it's the truth revealing itself. When they sense the possibility of losing something or someone meaningful, even an avoidant is capable of action, reflection, and pursuit. Here's the key to grasping this. Absence is not about punishment. It's not about playing games. It's not about making them suffer to teach them a lesson. Your absence is clarity in motion. It's a demonstration that your presence is intentional, that your energy is valuable, and that you will not dilute yourself to meet someone else's comfort level. And when the avoidant finally experiences the impact of that clarity, They are forced to confront the reality they've been avoiding, the reality of the connection, the importance of the relationship, and the possibility of loss. And this is where most people misunderstand the avoidant response. They see the action that follows as proof of love, or the lack thereof. But it's not that simple. The action is not a guarantee of consistency, nor is it a promise of change. What it is awareness made visible. Your absence illuminates what they have been ignoring, what they have been suppressing, and what deep down they actually value. And that illumination can be transformative, both for them and for you. This principle also teaches you something critical about your own power. You cannot control the avoidance timing, intensity, or decisions. What you can control is your presence, your absence, and the integrity with which you wield both. You step back, not to manipulate, not to punish, but to allow the natural psychological dynamics of recognition and desire to unfold. Your absence becomes a lens, a filter, and a catalyst all at once. And make no mistake, this is not easy. It requires patience, self-confidence, and emotional discipline. Watching someone you care about respond only after your absence challenges our instincts. Our natural tendency is to chase, to explain, to fix, to fill the void we perceive. But resisting that impulse is where mastery begins. Absence tests not only the avoidant, it tests you. It challenges you to remain grounded, to hold your boundaries, and to understand that your worth is not determined by someone else's timing. When you allow absence to do its work, remarkable things happen. Avoidants, in the face of potential loss, are capable of gestures, insights, and vulnerability that they rarely display when comfort and availability are guaranteed. What feels like unexpected action is actually the predictable result of clarity meeting fear, the meeting point of your self-respect and their unacknowledged desire. And in that meeting point, profound growth can occur, for them, for you, and for the relationship itself, if it is worthy of the energy you invest. So the takeaway here is simple but revolutionary. Presence is important, but absence is strategic. Constant availability keeps the avoidant asleep to the truth of the connection. Thoughtful absence awakens awareness, triggers reflection, and can elicit action that presence alone could never inspire. The power is not in chasing. It is in stepping back with intention, clarity, and self-respect. And here's the part that will change the way you approach every relationship. Your absence is not a void. It is a catalyst. It is the moment in which clarity, desire, and self-awareness collide. And it is in that collision that transformation begins. Now, let's dive into a dimension of avoidant psychology that is often overlooked, yet is profoundly revealing: their struggle with regret and self-sabotage. By now, you understand that avoidants fear closeness more than loss, that your absence can illuminate what they've been ignoring, that they test boundaries, and that your absence can even trigger unexpected action. But here's the catch: even when they recognize the value of a connection, even when your absence has made them aware of what they might lose, avoidants often fight themselves. Self-sabotage is a hallmark of the avoidant psyche. It isn't always obvious. It doesn't always take the form of overt rejection or cruelty. Sometimes it's subtle: procrastination, withdrawal, emotional unavailability, or creating friction at moments when connection is possible. They sabotage because intimacy is not just frightening, it's destabilizing. When they begin to feel, to reflect, to consider the depth of what they could lose, their instinct is often to retreat. They sabotage the connection before the connection can overwhelm them, before the intensity of feeling exposes their vulnerability, before they risk being consumed by emotion. And here's the paradox: this self-sabotage often comes after moments of clarity. You might see signs of awareness: the text they send after a long absence, the moment they reach out unexpectedly, the subtle effort to engage in a way they normally avoid. And yet, just as quickly, they pull back again. They undermine themselves because their brain is wired to protect them from the intensity of intimacy. In their mind, the discomfort of closeness outweighs the comfort of connection. And in their actions, you witness the tension between desire and fear, love and avoidance, regret and self-preservation. Regret is a quiet companion in their world. It is not always articulated. It often manifests as restlessness, irritability, or fleeting moments of tenderness that appear when you least expect them. Avoidants can feel deeply, even passionately, but the weight of feelings scares them. When your absence has already made them aware of what they risk, regret begins to build, and with it comes a subtle, almost unconscious urge to protect themselves, even if it means repeating old patterns that push you away. They are their own obstacle, and understanding this is key to seeing the full picture. This is why so many people feel caught in a cycle. They see moments of connection only to experience sudden distance. They feel hope only to be met with withdrawal. They think progress is being made only to watch old patterns re-emerge. It can be exhausting, confusing, and deeply painful. But when you understand the psychology behind it, everything shifts. You begin to recognize that what looks like inconsistency is actually the avoidant wrestling with themselves, the internal negotiation between what they want and what they fear. They are not rejecting you. They are negotiating the safety of their own mind and heart. And here's the profound takeaway. When you recognize the interplay of regret and self-sabotage, you stop taking it personally. You stop thinking their withdrawal is a reflection of your worth. You see it for what it is, a mirror of their internal struggle, an invitation to observe rather than chase, to respond with awareness rather than reaction, and in observing, you reclaim your power. You understand that your energy, your presence, and your boundaries are not negotiable, even in the face of someone else's internal chaos. There's also a lesson here about timing and patience. Avoidants may need space to process their feelings, to wrestle with their regret, to confront their self-sabotaging tendencies. And while it can feel like progress is slow or non-existent, that space is necessary. It is the crucible in which awareness, accountability, and eventual growth are forged. Your role is not to fix, to chase, or to rescue. Your role is to remain grounded, present, and self-respecting, allowing their internal process to unfold without compromising your own integrity. Because here's the ultimate truth. Avoidants struggle with regret and self-sabotage not because they don't care, but because they care too much in a way they don't yet know how to manage. They are caught between longing and fear, desire and protection, awareness and avoidance. And in that tension lies the potential for profound insight, for them, for you, and for the relationship itself, if it is approached with clarity and emotional intelligence. So the takeaway, the enduring lesson, is this. Their self-sabotage is a reflection of their inner fear, not a measure of your value. Understanding this allows you to remain steady, to hold your boundaries, and to witness growth and awareness without losing yourself in the turbulence of their struggle. Now, we arrive at a truth that ties everything together, the final piece of the puzzle, and it's one that will redefine the way you approach relationships with avoidance, or really with anyone. Presence and absence are not just tools, they are teachers. They teach emotional intelligence, they teach self-respect, they teach clarity. And when you begin to understand this, you realize that every interaction, every withdrawal, every gesture, and every silence is an opportunity for profound personal growth. Think about it. All our previous points, fearing closeness, awareness amplified by absence, boundary testing, unexpected action, regret, and self-sabotage, they set the stage. But what do we do with these experiences? How do we transform confusion, frustration, or even heartbreak into wisdom? That's where emotional intelligence comes in. Presence teaches you one lesson, and absence teaches you another. Presence teaches you how to engage without losing yourself, how to communicate without over-explaining, how to offer love and respect without diluting your value. Absence teaches you how to observe without reacting, how to hold boundaries without guilt, and how to recognize patterns that you might otherwise ignore. Together, they sculpt a new capacity for self-awareness and relational mastery. Here's the critical insight. Avoidants are not always forthcoming, and often their reactions are inconsistent. They may withdraw, push, pull, or act unexpectedly. And if you're reactive, chasing, pleading, or explaining yourself, you miss the lessons hidden in those dynamics. But if you maintain your presence when appropriate and your absence when necessary, you begin to see patterns. You begin to understand not only what drives the avoidant, but also how you respond under pressure, how your energy shifts when boundaries are tested, and how much clarity you are willing to uphold in the face of uncertainty. That's emotional intelligence in action. Let's take it deeper. Emotional intelligence isn't just about awareness of feelings. It's about choice. It's about knowing when to engage, when to step back, and when to invest energy in ways that honor your own integrity. When an avoidant retreats, it's easy to feel slighted, frustrated, or anxious. But by seeing their withdrawal not as a personal rejection, but as a signal, you gain power, you gain perspective, you gain insight into the rhythms of human connection. The ebb and flow between desire and fear, Intimacy and avoidance, courage and retreat. Your presence and your absence become instruments of learning. And there's something profoundly liberating about that. It transforms relationships from arenas of confusion and pain into laboratories of insight. Every push, every pull, every testing of boundaries is a reflection, not of your inadequacy, but of human complexity. Avoidants are mirrors, not adversaries. And when you hold space with awareness, patience, and clarity, you learn lessons that extend far beyond the relationship itself. About patience, about self-worth, about restraint, about discernment. You learn that love is not a transaction. It is a dynamic interplay of presence, absence, and awareness. But here's the ultimate power. Mastering the lessons of presence and absence doesn't just benefit your relationship with the avoidant. It transforms your relationship with yourself. You begin to recognize your patterns, your triggers, and your values. You learn to invest your energy wisely, to honor your needs without fear of rejection, and to recognize when engagement serves growth and when restraint serves wisdom. You become the observer, the strategist, the steady force in a relational storm. And that, my friends, is true emotional mastery. And here's the most important part. This mastery is not about controlling the avoidant. It is not about manipulating outcomes or forcing change. It is about understanding dynamics, respecting boundaries, and cultivating clarity in the midst of complexity. When you integrate presence and absence as teachers, you reclaim authority over your own life and emotions. You no longer define your worth by the availability or responses of another. You define it by your own integrity, your choices, and your capacity to act with awareness. So, as we reflect on everything we've explored, fear of closeness, the mirror of absence, boundary testing, unexpected action, regret, and self-sabotage, remember this. The final lesson is that your life is the canvas, and presence and absence are the brushstrokes. Each choice, each moment of engagement or withdrawal paints the picture of your emotional intelligence, your self-respect, and your ability to navigate human complexity with power and grace. And here's the closing truth I want you to carry. When you embrace the lessons of presence and absence, you no longer react to fear, you respond with clarity, you no longer chase validation, you operate from worth. And in that space, you are not just navigating relationships, you are mastering yourself. So, as we step back and look at the entire journey, here's what becomes crystal clear. Understanding an avoidant isn't about changing them. It's about understanding patterns, understanding fear, and understanding the powerful dynamics of presence and absence. It's about seeing that their fear of closeness, their testing of boundaries, their regret, their self-sabotage, these are all reflections of their own struggle, not a measure of your worth. Your absence is not a void, it is a mirror. Your presence is not a gift to be taken for granted. It is an act of clarity. And the space between presence and absence teaches you the most profound lessons. How to hold your boundaries without guilt. How to respond instead of react. How to cultivate patience, emotional intelligence, and self-respect. Every push and pull, every retreat and return is an opportunity for insight. An invitation to see patterns, recognize your power, and master your own emotional landscape. So I want you to leave with this. Do not fear their distance. Do not chase validation. Do not take their avoidance personally. Instead, step into your clarity, honor your presence, respect your absence, and let the dynamics reveal the truth, not about them, but about you. Because when you understand this, you no longer navigate relationships out of fear or uncertainty. You navigate them with wisdom, integrity, and strength. And here's the final truth, the takeaway that will change everything. Avoidance may fear closeness, but you have the power to embrace it within yourself. Your presence, your absence, your boundaries, they are not just tools. They are your freedom, your insight, and your ultimate mastery. Walk away with that, hold it, live it, and watch how every connection, every interaction, and every relationship transforms. Not because you change them, but because you have transformed yourself.